Hey everyone, Drew Murray here from D20 Advice, and we're on day 3 of this My 30-Day World thing that the Tabletop Terrors guys are doing, which is great. It's for the new Dragon Grin book. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this world building thing, so let's get to it. So the third question is this one. Who is the most nefarious villain in your world? Who is the most nefarious villain in your world? In my world? In the world of the Taihun? It's a good question. The most notorious villain? That's a toughie. It's a toughie. In my world, there are many villains and many kingdoms. And I'm going to say the most nefarious villain is Dinimtol. Dinimtol is the most cosmic villain. He's a front runner. No, front runner is the wrong word. He's the guy on the front lines. He's manipulating a lot of events. He's doing a lot of things in the background, but he's also there on the ground. He's someone that the adventurers will come up against. Dinimtol has an interesting backstory. So I used to come up with new campaigns and new worlds with new rules, and not like new game mechanics rules, but new flavor and fluff and story. I used to come up with those fairly regularly, every few months. And it was usually, we would switch to another one when people lost their character sheets. We would meet every week, have a game of D&D, and my friends would sometimes lose their character sheets. Or, on the rare occasions where I was interested with them, I would forget to bring them sometimes. Or, if I was hosting, people would forget to bring their character sheets if I didn't have them with me. So, we would just make new characters, and we'd figure, well, there's no point in making new characters and going back to the old mission, especially if everyone's forgotten the character sheets, so let's just do something new. We didn't really care about continuity after we'd done our first campaign and got to the end of that first campaign, because we kind of knew how campaigns went, and we were just looking for a bit of fun, let off a bit of steam. So I would create game after game. Then I had this idea for the Taihun, for this grander scale thing, and we were currently playing a game, and a couple of the characters got killed off, and so we decided, well, okay, we'll do that. We'll switch to someone else GMing for a little while because they really want to try something, and then we'll switch back to this. And one of my players asked if they could port their character over because their character hadn't died. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, okay, let's accept that this is a multiverse, and there's magic. Anything can happen. So yes, you can bring your character over from one campaign world to an entirely different campaign world. And the opening to the campaign will be you have teleported into this prison cell, and you've got to escape with the inhabitant. And the inhabitant was a half-dragon who was chained up by the elves. So this character in the other game, I'd introduced this pool of water, and I'd started using, instead of spell scrolls, I used little clay tiles, which is still a mainstay of the Taihun campaign world, using items other than scrolls that still require the same mechanics to activate, but instead of you reading from a scroll, you're doing some other action. You're crushing these clay tiles. You are tearing a leather strip, which was another favorite of mine. So you'd have this kind of like a scroll. You'd have some magical inscription on a strip of leather, but instead of it being like the whole spell written out, it's just some sort of arcane sigils, and you would tear or bite into this strip of leather, and that would activate it. It's the breaking of it that causes the magic to come out. So with the clay tile, same thing. I introduced these clay tiles, one of which would teleport the party to this rare magical artifact, this weapon of legend, and the other one was a resurrection spell in a clay tile, and one of the party had been injured to the point of being near death. This is version 3, so they were bleeding out, and once they got to -10, they'd be dead, and everyone had run out of healing spells. So I introduced this pool, a magical pool that would duplicate the magic in the tiles. And I also introduced that the tiles were linked. You could activate one and not the other. But if you duplicated the tiles, the magic tying them would be duplicated, and you could get the best of both worlds. You could use either Resurrection twice, or teleport to this place twice. Don't know why you would. Or you could use one and the other. That was the premise. Of course, when they came upon this pool, they decided to drink the water, the still water that was in this pool, sat in a stone pool. Really, it was, it wasn't a well or anything. It was just standing water sat in the middle of the room. And so one of them decided to drink it, which was a bit weird. But I still wanted them to have the option of duplicating the tile. So I then had that character split into two, like Ash from Evil Dead, from Evil Dead 3, Army of Darkness. So he splits into two. The character was, I think it was true neutral or neutral evil. Like, he wasn't an evil person, but he was out for himself more than anything else. So the twin, he asked if it was an evil twin. And I thought that was a fun idea, so I went with it. That yes, this one was slightly more on the evil side. I've forgotten the actual character's name. But Dinimtol is an anagram of it, and I can't remember the original character's name now. That's bugging me. But so Dinimtol was an anagram of this character's name, and he decided to go by that. And very soon after that, we stopped that campaign, so that it never really got to pay off. And I thought, well, okay, he's porting his character over. I'll port the villain over as well. And then I added some time displacement so that when one was sucked through into the dimensional well, the other one was. But similar to like Thor Ragnarok, time works differently when you're porting between dimensions, and so Dinimtol arrives 1,000 years ago and lands just when the elves are starting to feel a bit uppity about themselves and other races. And so he goes on his way towards lichdom, becomes a lich, or a lich. I'm not sure how people pronounce it, but I just say lich. So you get that sort of lich villain thing, just making his way in the world, aggravating political tensions. He's pulling a lot of strings. He will make himself look like an elven leader and lead the elves into more of their arrogance and try to subjugate other races, which is not a worldwide thing. There are aspects of the world where the elves are just into themselves and more interested in their internal politics. And then there's one area of the world where the high elves consider themselves to be the sole proprietors of magic. They are the only ones that deserve to have magic, and they're the only ones that deserve to be free. They had a war with dwarves, didn't work out, so they were just sort of like a sit on opposite sides in like this Cold War thing. The dwarves do sort of fund a proxy war by funding the human and halfling rebellion, but the humans and halflings live in slums around these elven cities where Dinimtol has worked his magic. Not real magic, except to make himself look like an elf, but he's influenced these elves to do something. The silver-tongued devil that he is. That version of Taihun wrapped up with Dinimtol working closely with the Mind Flayers. And so I would say that Dinimtol being ever present in that and trying to bring about the end of the world so that he could collapse down the universe, like bring an actual physical end to the universe, so that he could absorb all the magic in it and become a god. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to become a god separate from the Taihun. and so he managed to limit the Taihun's influence on the planet using various magical artifacts and things. So yeah, I'd say he's pretty close to a main villain, the most notorious villain in the world. But yeah, running the campaign now, I've scaled it back a few years as well, because I've run the campaign to the end of that storyline. So now when I'm going back to it with other people, I'm rewinding it back a few steps more than when I started, exploring more of the past, because I wanted Dinimtal to sort of like be a force on the horizon rather than straight away, because no one's got that connection anymore. But I still like the idea of this lich that wants to absorb all magic and become all powerful, and he's gone mad. So Dinimtal still, I'm not sure if there's one in this list about going more into villains or lore or anything, so I'll leave it for another video. But Dinimtal's still mad. He's not got the same connection as he had when he was first conceived, but that sort of thing. And yeah, he's just a bad guy. Does bad things, kills people that gets in his way. Wants to control magic. So that's Notorious. Oh, I suppose if he was notorious, he'd be famous, which he's not really. Yeah, there isn't really famous villain. Ooh, there was that lich lady. My wife ran her own campaign, which I've then sort of subsumed into like a part of my campaign world. It's not like a subcontinent at the bottom of the landmass. But she had a very interesting lich villain, which stumped the players for a while, actually, because she has these eggs that are dragon eggs, and that they act as like a key in her sarcophagus. And so the characters had this egg, and they also had a black powder thing with it. I think it was just ashes. And they collected the ashes, and they gathered the egg, and they went on their merry way, left that dungeon and went elsewhere. And then they started getting sick. They were sick with mummy rot, in fact. And they figured they contracted it from this black powder, because they hadn't faced any mummies. So they buried the black powder, thinking that would be the end of it, because obviously it's not going to seep into the soil. But that wasn't the case. It was the egg. The fact that they had this lich's thing. And so the mummy rot was something to power up the lich. As the mummy rot spread and sucked up life force, she would become more and more powerful until she was powerful enough to rise again. But they went to her tomb. They placed the egg in the sarcophagus because they saw an egg-shaped recess, and they just went, fine, have this. And yeah, they awoke the Lich Queen. Which, that was exciting. But she was more well known in that region, and there were legends surrounding her. So I'd say that's more notorious. But yeah, so liches, the undead, are like my villains du jour in my campaign world. But yeah, my campaign world deals with the fact that everyone's a villain to someone, and everyone's a hero of their own story. You've got the name escapes me. I'll need to go and double check. But one of the dragons in the north, at the North Pole, he guards between the realms of the living and the dead. He is a villain to a lot of people. He's basically like the Godfather. He sets people out to go and like do his bidding and manipulate world events because he enjoys it. So there's a lot of pain and suffering that is owed to him. He is the one that orchestrated it, but he doesn't care. It's small mortal lives. He's just eternally watching vigil over the lands of the dead and making sure they don't get too uppity. What does he care if a few farmers lose their farmland and die, get tortured by goblins in the hills because the goblin territory is being encroached upon by a beholder because the dragon decided to move the beholder down there because the beholder's magical fireworks at night was blocking the dragon's view of a particular constellation or something. Like it's that kind of grand view of the world makes that guy Gorbane. That was it, Gorbane. Yeah, gigantic green dragon, bigger than Colossal. Yeah, it's just some legendary creature that does not give a rat's bottom. You know, so that's another villain that's could be an ally to the player characters if they don't mind the moral ambiguity there. The Thane, not the Thane, the Jarl of Sommergleam, one of the main southern towns that I base a lot of the adventures around. It's sort of like my Sword Coast area when you talk about Forgotten Realms. There's a place where a lot of the stuff happens. Anyway, they just want to amass power and spread the human kingdoms. That is their domain. The Jarl, she wants to spread her kingdom far and wide. She doesn't care about race, and that's another thing as well. In my campaign world, race doesn't matter. Politics do, which I realise is a bit of a charged thing these days. So they don't care that you're an elf. They just care whether or not you're allegiant to an elven prince or princess or a king or a queen or some fey lord out in the woods. If you're a human, it matters that you follow this bannerman and not that bannerman. It matters who you are allegiant to, not what makeup you are. With the exception of certain races, like dragons, because dragons are hunted for their materials, because dragons are special. And I will go into that in a future thing, I'm sure. I think I remember. I took a sneak peek, and there was something about magic later on, which I've already sort of gone into, but there's more detail. So, yes, this is already far too long. Long story short, Dinimtol, a lich, wants to absorb all magic into himself. Notorious villain. There's also a massive dragon and a lich queen, and there's kings that are conniving against each other, elven princes and lords that just do not care, kind of like small-scale versions of the dragon that just don't have as much influence. Everyone's a dick. Everyone is awful to each other for their own personal gain, but they care about their own tribes to greater or lesser degrees. So finding a notorious villain for my setting is difficult. I suppose because my setting isn't just one set of adventures. My setting is a setting, a place to set your own adventures. The difference is in my setting, I've got a different set of lore to certain creatures. But I'm sure it's pretty much the same in most settings. It just seems that sometimes people are confusing a setting or a campaign setting with a campaign, like a singular set of adventures within the usual standard D&D framework. Like some of my monsters don't have the same background as the Monster Manual monsters when I use them in my homebrew campaign world. Homebrew is another thing. Like, I don't like the term homebrew. It feels like it's lessening the thing. Like, I never touched a module until last year. Been running D&D for 17 years, didn't touch a module till last year. Modules were just not my thing. I picked up the books. I saw how fantastic it was to be able to make your own stuff. I started on the second edition, so it was all like, talk with your GM, which was me invariably, and design your own cleric, pick your own powers and things. Here's a suggestion, but make your own. So we made our own. And we did the same with the lands, the worlds, the kingdoms. Everything was our own making. And that's how we just assumed it was for everyone. Apparently it's not. The more and more people that get online and talk about the hobby, it seems that more and more people are people that use the already created stuff, which is fine. You can do that. Just not for me, really. I enjoy the act of creation, presenting it to people, and weaving a good story. That's the great thing, is as the DM, taking care about story and presentation. So anyway, speaking of presentation, this has gone on way too long. It's gone way off topic. I'm not going to bother editing it down too much because scheduling and stuff. So this is just going to get like a beginning and end thing popped on, and you're going to get it as is. Thank you very much for listening. You probably haven't listened all the way to the end. You've probably stopped already because you've realized the cadence of my voice has shifted to sort of say goodbye. So bye.